There are a few special IP addresses or IP numbers that carry special meaning, and because of that, you cannot assign them to a specific system. In this section, I'd like to look at those special IP addresses. The first one is the network ID. We have seen this number before, but I've never truly defined it for you. The network ID is the IP address where the host ID bits are all zeros. So for example, let's say I had 172.17.0.0 and my prefix length here is /16. In this scenario, 172.17, the first two octets, the first 16 bits, are network ID, and the next two octets, the last two octets, are host ID. In this particular number, the host ID section is all zeros. Therefore, this number that you're looking at is a network ID number, 172.17. 0.0/16 is a network ID. This is sometimes referred to as a routing prefix. This number will appear in the routing table of routers and be used to identify the 172.17 network. Let's look at a trickier example. Let's say we had an IP address like 192.168.9.4/30. What am I looking at here? What type of IP address is this? Can I assign this to a system? Well, /30 is covering the first three octets entirely, and it's covering some of the bits in the fourth octet. So we need to look at the fourth octet more closely. 4 in binary is 0, 0, 1. This is 1, 2, this column is 4, we put a 1 there, so that's 4. But the octet is 8 bits, so we need to pad this with 5 zeros. And we have 8 bits there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 30 is covering the first three octets. Up to this point here, you have 24 bits. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. These are 30 bits, so this is your 30th bit here. The value of this is 4, and then these last two bits here are host ID bits. But look at this, the host ID bits have a value of 0. So therefore, this number that you're looking at is a network ID because host ID is all zeros. In a prior video, we looked at the broadcast IP, and I'll just quickly recap this. This is where the IP address is all ones. So there is only one broadcast IP, and that broadcast IP is 255.255.255.255. Now, there's another type of broadcast IP address called the directed broadcast IP. And the directed broadcast IP is the IP address where the host ID is all ones. For example, let me give you an IP address that meets this criteria. Let's say we had 172.17.20 255.255. The prefix here is /16. What we're looking at here is the first 16 bits, or the first 2 octets, is network ID, and the last 2 octets are host ID. The last 2 octets has 255.255, which is all ones. This is 8 ones, this is 8 ones. The entire host ID section is all ones. This number you're looking at is therefore a directed broadcast IP address, and you cannot assign this to a system. What does this IP address therefore mean? Well, it means if you send any data to this IP address as your destination IP address, you want that data sent to all systems on the 172.17 network. That is different from the, let's call this the general broadcast IP address of 255.255.255.255. If you sent data to this IP address, you're saying send this packet to everyone on every connected network. Whereas the directed broadcast IP is saying send this packet to everyone on the 172.17 network. So that's a big difference. The broadcast IP is saying send this packet to everyone in the universe, and the directed broadcast IP is saying send this packet to everyone in Ireland, for example. The last special IP address I would like to look at is the loopback IP address. The Internet authorities reserve the range of IP addresses starting with 127.0.0.0 all the way to 127.255.255.255 as your loopback IP address range. The loopback IP points to yourself. In other words, in a computer network, that IP address will always point back to your machine. If you sent data to 127.0.0.1, you're sending that data to yourself. The loopback IP is used for a couple things. It's used for diagnostics, and it's used in a scenario where you need to connect to the local host. Let's talk about these two. If you pinged the loopback IP, you're technically testing whether or not the TCP/IP software is installed correctly on your system and whether or not your network card driver is installed correctly. So that's diagnostics. The local host, sometimes you might want to be able to connect to another piece of software running on your own computer. So let's say you had a web server set up on your computer, and on your same computer you were in the browser and you wanted to connect to the web server on your same system. What address do you type into the browser? Well, you could type in the loopback IP 127.0.0.1, or you could type in localhost, which is a name that is usually associated with the loopback IP on most systems. One last point here. I'm using this IP address as an example of a loopback IP. This is not the only loopback IP. I'd like to remind you that the loopback IP is a range of IP addresses. The rule is if it starts with 127, it's loopback. So this is the typical IP that most people use, but if I had used 127.59.63.28, that is also a loopback IP. To summarize, the loopback IP points to yourself, and as a result, you cannot assign this IP in your TCP/IP properties.